Hey everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we're diving into a topic that's deeply personal and also very important. And this is advice for women that are contemplating divorce. So whether you're feeling trapped in an unhappy marriage, experiencing whatever difficulties you are experiencing in your situation, or just exploring your options, this video is to provide you with guidance and support. We know that divorce is a very complex decision and it involves emotional and legal considerations and just the straight out practical considerations as well. So it's crucial that you approach it with clarity and preparation. And we hope that on this video, we'll be able to give you some tips to help you navigate this very challenging journey. So, we have a few pointers and we'll just take it from there. So I think let's start at the very beginning. If you're going through a divorce, you need some self-reflection and clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the times you're ping-ponging back and forth between, is this the right decision? So a lot of the time should be spent, assessing whether or not that's the case, to sit down, assess how you feel about the situation, whether it's, something that could be resolved through other means like counseling or, just assessing the different needs so that you can make that clear decision. And it's not a perfect harmonious situation where you could just say, "Yep, today's the day," and then make that. For some people, it might be. For most, it's not. It's a lot of times and troubling issues that lead to, that inevitable, conclusion. Sometimes people might take a preemptive step and they're not sure if that's the right one. So sitting down and, assessing whether or not that's the right choice and taking time to figure out how you feel about those situations and the potential impacts, so it's important to first reflect with yourself, whether that's the right decision. It's not going to be a perfect timing. So if you're waiting for it, it might be something to think about, but definitely need to sit down and reflect about the decision before making it.
Let's talk about, understanding rights and options really, because if you do decide that you want to go through a divorce, when anyone deciding that, or even just doing a test separation, which is what some people do, it's like let's take a break and just kind of see where things go from here. um I mean, a crucial next step is for them to understand their rights and options and
Absolutely.
obligations, actually, because there are consequences to this decision. And so
Mhm.
we always say, number one, speak to a family law lawyer. It should be part of, honestly, your self reflection and clarity,
Yeah.
because, it may help you realize that this may not be the path that you want to go down on. But about what kind of things would you talk to with a client during a consultation?
Oh man, it's a long list. First, it's like, we need to talk about the financial aspects. We need to talk about equalization, division of property, that type of thing. When you talk about spousal support, if that applies here, child support, if that applies here, if there's businesses that are owned together or like investment properties that are owned together, how are those things going to be divided and like dealt with? Also, are there children involved? Are we talking about like primary residence with one parent? Are we talking about a shared schedule? So I feel like something that also happens is that because of social media and television, a lot of people are quite ill-informed about their responsibilities and their rights. And they're like, this thing about child support, this thing about spousal support. But speaking to a lawyer will actually guide you, tell you the actual stuff you need to know, not all this like stuff from social media and television.
No, I,
So
I love
yeah.
that you said social media and TV, because the number of times we
Oof.
we people come to us with information that's from the States. People forget that, like, or
Yeah.
I'm sure if you're even watching like a foreign, soap opera, the laws may not be applicable, but that's going too far, even in the States. The number of ideas people come to us and things like community assets and marital assets, and we're just like, yeah, it's really
That's
not
not a
how
thing.
it works here. Okay, so when a person's had that, they've had the consultation, I think for me, I'd say maybe it's another step that needs to be taken is preparing financially. So your financial preparations, right? So Shirin, what are some documents that you would ask people to begin to collate and as they contemplate this process?
Absolutely. So, in terms of documentation, first you'll need income documentation. So, tax documents that reflect your income. Maybe they will go back a few years. Most notably, like we use 3 years, depending on your circumstances. We might ask for more, but essentially, we'd be looking at income documentation, bank statements for all of the accounts that you hold, investments, any pension statements that you have, any documents relating to real property. So if you have a mortgage, documentation supporting the mortgage loan or any other personal lines of credits or line of credit or any credit card per se. So really just think of it as like a screenshot of your financial picture. So all of the assets that you have, all of the debts that you carry.
And I think for me, when clients consult with me as well, a thought that comes to mind, especially if they've not been married for too long, is trying to maybe get them to the banks to get date of marriage
Marriage.
documentation as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah, so that's for something that you want to take a look. Obviously, there's a retention period with banks. Sometimes it's, 7 to 8 years, depending on the banking institution, but it's difficult to get it. And also, they're usually back ordered. You can get a special request, not back ordered, sorry. You can make a special request to get that information. So obviously, the sooner you put in that request, the faster you can have those documents. So something to just kind of put your mind to and to see if even it's possible to get some sort of disclosure to support the values that you had or the assets that you had coming into the marriage. So that's going to be very key is getting disclosure to support those values because a lot of the times people can't or they don't make enough of an effort and you want to make that effort if that's your situation.
And Rebecca, would you encourage someone as part of this preparation process to also maybe begin to put together a budget so that they can understand their finances going forward?
Absolutely. Because now if you're getting separated, likely your financial situation is going to change more likely than not. So, if you're coming from like a two income household, how is that going to translate into now it being a one income household? One thing I also find with a lot of women is that sometimes they decide to let go of spousal support even if they are entitled because they're like, oh, I don't want to come off as a gold digger. But that's something you need to consider. Maybe it's money that you need to like continue to live your life the way you need to. And like at this point, it's not really about like perception. It's about like what makes the most sense for you. If you're the primary caregiver of the children, what makes the most sense for your children as well. So these are things that you kind of have to take into consideration.
That's such a good point that you've made there because that is a concern. And I also find this with male clients as well, even though we are speaking more to women in this video, but it is sometimes people just or even certain assets are like, well, it's okay, I'm not going to touch the pension because they worked for it or whatever. As unfair as the law may seem in some situations, it's designed to recognize that some people made contributions to the marriage that are not monetary. So yes, you may have, as a woman, you may have been home all the time and allowed while the other person worked, in this context, say male, for example, they worked outside of the home and acquired a pension and you feel like they went to work every day, but you forget that if there are children, for example, just that mental peace and clarity that you were able to provide that person by being the one primarily taking care of the children, maybe not pursuing a career that's as more as high profile or and that allow you to acquire that pension asset is a benefit to that person because they may not have been able to acquire that much. So yes, you want to think about yourself, your children, talk to a financial planner as well. Speaking of that, even some of the financial planners, they actually have longer, some of them have longer retention periods than the banks. I have had clients that have been able to get, paperwork as far back as 2000 from their financial advisor. So if you're, one of those that are blessed to have had the same financial advisor over the years, um, you know, maybe go talk to them if you have concerns about, maybe your spouse knowing, then speak to someone else so that you understand your finances. Because when you say no to that spousal support and you sign that spousal support release and you're left struggling later, it's a really uphill battle to try to change your mind later. So you're better off having a budget, being formed, and make whatever decision is best for your situation. So Sheree, let's talk about emotional support. I mean, wherever you get the help, get it. That could be
Yeah,
overstated.
Absolutely. I think that's such an undervalued issue, but it's such a fundamental part when someone is really struggling and going through a separation process or even considering that process. I always even during my consults I say, who's your emotional support so that when the triggers come or when the situation becomes difficult, they know who they can rely on. So, emotional support can come in many forms. Your trusted family, your trusted friends, the support from a therapist, a counselor, any other third party that's going to support you through this process. And you want to also be careful about who you're trusting because we've had situations where, they seem to be, on in the position of supporting you, but and then also supporting your spouse and maybe there might be some mechanics. I've had situations where one party would be closer to the other person's spouse sorry, their spouse's family than
Hmm.
they are. So they would think that that would be an appropriate place to divulge their issues. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, so just
Yeah.
careful when you're considering, who you could trust for that emotional support, but it's very crucial and I think it's very helpful. So look for it wherever you can, but kind of think about it early on, like who's going to be able to support you emotionally. And even sometimes those are the same people who support you financially to get you to where you need to be before you see a lawyer or, during that process.
I want to add that if you have that emotional support, it would make the legal process more seamless and way less expensive. I think, we say this a lot in our videos, but you want to be very careful of using your lawyer as your emotional support and your therapist as well. Because for two reasons. One is, you're getting charged by your lawyers. It's not, and if we're not able to help you, then what's the point? But the other part is when you're speaking to us as well, we're listening to things. We're not listening passively the way maybe a friend will, or a therapist will. We're looking for the legal issues involved in what you're telling us, and sometimes all you just really want to do is vent, but that's not happening with us. We're hearing everything. We're wondering what solutions we can find for you and what remedies, and sometimes it's not necessarily every issue that we need to make into a legal issue. So obviously if it's a gray area and you're not sure, then I mean, if you talk it out with someone and then let us know, okay, this is the thought that I had, and I don't know if this is a legal issue that we need to be dealing with and all of that. But there are people that just would call and speak to lawyers and just spend hours, and really there's no issue. And I understand. I get it. It's a difficult time, but I feel like therapists sometimes have better training than we do, or even joining online groups. There's a lot of online support
Yeah.
groups for people going through divorces and separations. They are so valuable, so long as you're careful with the legal advice you get in these forums, because some people are experienced in divorce there, but they're not necessarily advising you for your specific situation. So, but having that, just that little bit aside, they're helpful. And we just want to make sure that you feel supported, and we think it's important. But here's another area that you may need to be concerned about. Doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, but safety planning. So Rabab, what are your thoughts here with respect to safety planning?
Okay, so if like you're in a situation where you might think that there's some abuse, and abuse is not always physical, there's mental, there's emotional, there's financial, you might need to start planning like for your safety. And then also like if you have children as well, for them. The emotional support that we've mentioned is obviously very important, but sometimes you need to physically remove yourself from there just in case, like, things go left. Like, do you have family you can go to? Do you have friends you can go to? Do you need to call the police to remove the abusive person out of, where you're at currently? Is there, somewhere else you need to go where you can hide your address and things like that? Do we need to start talking about restraining orders? So these are all things that like you might want to consider. And something that we actually do at AP Lawyers is if when we're doing a consult, if we suspect that the situation might be abusive, we provide people with like, some safety plans, something that people that they can call, and like actions that they can take to like help guide them in that situation.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the children. the impact on the children. I mean, I don't know if this could also be over, if it could be overstated. And I want to be careful here because I know a lot of times when, especially with women, when they think about impact on the children, they sometimes interpret that as meaning that they need to remain in a bad situation on behalf of the children. So that's not what we're talking about here. But Shireen, I'll have you, take a stab at this.
Oh, no, absolutely. And to your point, like a lot of people choose to separate a lot later than they
Yeah.
initially would like, just to they hope to minimize the impact. Sometimes it might be a trigger point of like, let me at least wait till the children are done high school so that they can be off to university, which is actually I see it happen a little more often than not. But and that's that same idea of like when is the right time, right? So the reality is like all parents will consider the impact that'll have to their children, and whether or not that's emotional impact, the financial impact, and even the performance, just the overall welfare for the child. So how will it impact their school if the parties have to come up with a residential schedule that requires them to move, or the home needs to be sold, which requires them to move. What would the same, again, we're coming from what Bob called maybe a two-income household to a one-income household. So the financial impact of maybe, the children doing certain activities, and, maybe they don't get to have the same standard of living that they used to, or the same, access to the certain things that they used to do. So a lot of the times, people are plagued with those ideas of, okay, well, how is that going to impact them? So it's definitely a consideration, but there's a lot to be able to assist the children. I would like to think like early on, when you're separating, thinking about the impact early on. So, okay, if I have to, obviously we're hoping that you would speak to a lawyer or a financial planner in deciding the financial aspects, which would
Mhm.
answer a lot of the impact maybe from a financial perspective. If the children do have to relocate, like what's the closest jurisdiction that you'll be able to put the children in, with the minimal impact, or can you rent a place nearby to continue to allow the children to finish school, at least maybe if they're, in that, the middle of the school year, or let's say, they have a year or two before they're done their primary school. So things like that to consider, but also their emotional impact, thinking of like early resources that they might have access to, either through the school if financial is an issue. You could always speak to the school and, assess whether or not they have some counseling available, and then also, private counseling, any third party private um, assistance that you can get. So I mean, it's not understated, like you said, it's a very important issue. At the end of the day, a lot of the considerations for the impact of the children have to do with how are the children going to fare, and that's the biggest concern. So putting your mind to that a little early on, but at the same time, trying to minimize as much disruption to their life as possible. Some things might not be inevitable, but the one thing we learn, and the judges tell us all the time, is that children are resilient. That is the most common saying that I hear from a judge, is that, we understand that this is not maybe where the child wants to go to school, but if I've learned anything, is that children are resilient. So I leave with that.
Yeah. Speaking of where they go to school now, Barbara, would you ask your friend to maybe consider what kind of co-parenting arrangements, for example, would be appropriate for the children?
Absolutely. So, like Shireen said, it's something you want to put your mind to early on in terms of, what's best for the children, what makes the most sense. Would it be like, a shared parenting arrangement of like, okay, let's say they switch out week about, or, one parent has every Monday and Tuesday, the other has every Wednesday and Thursday, and you switch out on weekends. How far is the other parent living from the catchment area, like the school, and in terms of do they have help in terms of who's going to bring them to school, take them home, things like that. So these are things you kind of have to put your mind to in terms of like what makes sense. And also like, the
Yeah.
parents like work schedule, because like as Angela had said before, it might be a situation where one party was a stay-at-home parent and the other party, went to work every day. So now that there's a separation, that party that goes to work every day, are they going to be able to care for the children when the children are in their care? Would it make more sense for them to only be able to see the children on weekends? So these are all things you kind of have to like put your mind to. And even when you're coming up with these decisions, is a nesting arrangement what makes sense at this point, where the children kind of stay in the home, and then the parents like switch out until you're able to make a decision on what makes the most sense. So, like, I mean, the primary consideration is the best interest of the children. So that's something you have to think about.
Absolutely. And on that note of the best interest of the children as well, is important to remember that we said consider the impact on the children, but you also have to have an open mind in recognizing that at this point, you're looking at things from just your perspective. So while you may think that it is best because, you were a stay-at-home mom for the children to remain with you primarily, it may not be going, and the other party maybe works. When we have seen situations where the other side changes their work schedule or changes things, knowing that they now have these responsibilities at certain times. So be flexible. And I like about what you just said there, which it's always the best interest of the children. So if you have an idea of what works best, but just be open minded to making sure that listening to what the other person has to say and creating a parenting arrangement that would work in the children's best interest. So, okay, I was going to ask each of you, do any of you maybe consider, would you say, it's also a good idea to evaluate alternatives to divorce?
Absolutely. I mean, it depends especially if you're on the fence, right? A lot of the times, I've even had people start a separation and then be like, you know what? We've thought about
Yeah.
this and we're actually just going to reconcile. And it happens so often, and it's a good thing when it does. And I hope that it lasts, if it's something that's good for them. But yeah, of course, I always want to explore that. If there's someone I'm speaking to and they're like, you know what, I've thought about this for years and I'm just done. I've tried marriage counseling, I've done all that, then that's a different
Yes.
situation. But if because of the finality of such a decision and the impact and the considerations that all have to unfold for that process to take place, it's best to make sure that's exactly what you want. And to do so, you might want to confirm, are there other avenues? The marriage counseling, mediation, a separate, like maybe like an interim separation. It's still like an important thing for you to get legal advice prior to that issue taking place, but there's still an alternative. So you should know what your rights and obligations are before embarking on, a trial separation or any other alternative means. So, but I always think that it's something worth considering for sure.
To also bring back like what Shireen was saying earlier about you also want to think about what your motivations are. Are you like, continuing to stay in the marriage because you're like, oh, I want to do this for the children? You know what I mean? So like make sure that if you're deciding to stay, it's something that you've examined, you've spoken to a therapist, you guys have done marriage counseling, and it is what makes sense for your family. Not because you're like, oh, I'm gonna wait until the children graduate from university from high school and then we'll revisit it then. Because like as Shireen said, children are resilient. You need to do what makes sense.
On that note, I'll just throw in trust your instincts, just trust yourself. And, I think Shireen, you also mentioned this earlier, there's never a perfect time. Maybe this was the perfect time. If you lose it, just trust that, you will find the next perfect time and these things would work out. But let's talk about preparing for the challenges. So, Rabah, what are your thoughts there? What are some, challenges that you would ask a client to prepare for if she's contemplating this process?
I think we've touched on quite a bit of them in terms of like, the financial preparation, in terms of the emotional preparation. But one thing that I find is how shocked people are that people change during the process. I've heard so many times clients saying, oh, he would never do that to me. She would never do that to me. I'm like, they can and they will, they could. Like,
Many
and
times they do.
many times they do. So that can go very left. So I always try to advise clients be prepared because this isn't necessarily the person that you married. There's a lot of like hurt, there's a lot of anger that's going through like their minds at this point. They're saying, this person's leaving me or I'm leaving them, or like, there's just a lot of emotions at this point. So one thing that I find that clients are very ill prepared for is just that change in that other person.
That's a very good one. And I'll say be prepared for this an amicable process to turn into a very contentious legal battle. A lot of times, with the number of times we've had clients come to us with settlement terms, and it's all ready, and everyone's on board, and the other person gets independent legal advice, and now it's a game changer. And it's not so much, and I will be fair, like if we're advising a woman, this is what if this is what they've agreed to, or I'll say in situations where, for one some reason or the other, the other spouse feels guilty of something. That's why I see this happen a lot. And so, in the process of talking through it, they give everything over and beyond maybe what they're even supposed to give under the law. And now they go get independent legal advice and are now empowered. And all of a sudden, they go from you can have the house, I want nothing to do with it, to I want 50% of the proceeds of this home, and everything just changes just like that, and it's something that they are legally entitled to. But no matter, it's difficult because for our clients, they're emotionally tied into a certain outcome. They invested in those negotiations, and to just have someone kind of throw them off, um it happens. So these things happen, unfortunately. So that's we'll just have to say, stay patient and resilient through the process. And the last tip I'd like to throw out is just seeking professional, guidance, whether it's like legal, financial, whatever it is. I think just seek help. Legal for sure. You want to get legal help, because no matter what, there are legal consequences to a lot of things, and unfortunately, while we do try to give as much information as possible, we may not be able to tailor it for all of the details and nuances of your particular circumstances. So do seek legal advice for yourself. We talked about the support groups. We've talked about you talking to a financial advisor. Um, Ladies, is there anything else you can think of that can help, women navigating and contemplating divorce?
I mean, not something simple. Like, I think it's just kind of like it would cater to your particular situation, which is why, like, what you said about like seeking independent legal advice, because everybody's situation is a little different, just depending on like, the facts and the particulars of your situation. Our advice may like change a little bit. So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Shireen,
I
have you said it all, or do you have any last thing to say?
I feel like I've said it all, but just in all in all, the one takeaway is if you get, a lawyer's opinion on your situation, they'd be able to guide you. I mean, understandably, they'd be able to guide you through the financial and legal aspects, but also, on the issues of parenting, which would help you plan. So I would always say start there, and then I will, after contemplation, start there and then figure out what your next steps are. I always say, even after my consults, I say, you know what, you don't need to do anything right now. Just let that simmer. Let the conversation we've had simmer. If you need to go seek, additional supports, go do that and then make that decision and then come back, if that's something you want to do. So, but all in all, I always say, and I think Angela says this all the time, is the approach or the goal might be the same, but how we get there might change. So the strategy might change. So always, never tying yourself to that outcome. There's an idea of maybe how a goal is, and then, how you get there might just change as the file progresses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well said, ladies. So I hope you found this video helpful. Please like, subscribe, and share it with others who you think may benefit from this. And just remember, you're not in this journey alone. Try to find support. Reach out to us if you need our help. And thanks for watching. And we'll see you in the next video. Bye.